Okay. Okay. Does, even though the eyes work very well for us, does everyone or anyone have a or more or multiple blind spots? Do we? Yes. When you say two, why is that correct? I mean, why do we as humans have a blind spot? Well, yeah, that's what it means. You can't see it. That's what being blind means. But where do images focus in our eyes? Back in the retina, okay? But where your optic nerve has to send information back to the brain, that's where nothing can focus in on, because the anatomy of the eye would not allow that to happen. There's no surface area of the cornea for that to take focus. Now, for instance, where does the cerebellum fit in with that of the brain? It's tied into, it works with your cortex with one of the four functions. And what might that be? So what are your four functions of your cortex? Speech, emotions, coordination, and your memory, okay? So your different parts of your cortex do control each side of the body, but it has to continually get input from your senses, and that's where your cerebellum is needed, because that will continually send information back to your cortex for coordination. And what did we do to, let's say, prove that? Why is the football, yes, what about the football field? Because if you are not receiving that input from the horizon, for instance, okay, you don't know really which way is up, because when you see the horizon, whether, even if it's looking down at the ground and or out amongst ahead of you, that information then is sent to your cerebellum, which then will coordinate with your cortex. That's where your coordination comes from. That is just a little bit different than, let's say, for instance, okay, this is what the A&P class, no, the zoology class, okay? So for those of you who are in that class last hour, okay, I'll just kind of retrace what I had. Okay, this doesn't mean anything to anybody else, but I'm not using my cerebellum, okay? I'm using coordination to make circles and things like that. That's true. But, so remember the drawing of, he was a savant that is autistic. You just saw he would blink his eyes and just look at the skyline of London, and then go back to his studio, and I don't know if it's gave a time frame. I want to say 2 or 3 hours. Okay, just sat down with a pen and paper and drew out the entire skyline of London. Okay, now he's using coordination. That's true, just like I'm using coordination here, but that is totally different than walking. Why is walking coordination, do you think, different than this type of coordination? Because it goes back to the point that you made, which was what? Yeah, because if you don't have that visual input, you don't know where the horizon is, and your cerebellum cannot coordinate with your cortex. But there's different types of activities that we do that do require that coordination. And that comes from your eyes, comes from your ears too. But that type of input to your cortex, some of it is memory-based, okay? Just like drawing the shape of this clam. That is memory-based coordination. What you experimented on was visual based. That's different ways that you have coordination in your brain. And we'll see a little more about that in today's video. Okay, so we will continue with that. I just printed your papers today. So I will go and grab them towards the end of the hour and hand them out, and we'll discuss a little further in depth when we want them turned in. So we will continue with our brain's deception, I think is what it was called. Let's continue with that and then talk about that again at a later time. And again, the theory behind this is you're going to learn so much more from actual neuroscientists than whatever I could place on to you for information. And that's why we do this. So hopefully we can agree that that makes sense.
Think that guy down there?
That's right, but it's very hard for you to see, right?
Every time I look at him, it disappears because it's blocked. It blocks it.
This actually is interesting because it's in high quality vision wherever you look, but it's blurry in the surround.
Now the scene looks normal to me, but mostly blurry to you because your eye movements don't match mine.
Wherever you happen to look, you have high quality image processing happening, and the surround is completely blurry. This kind of represents exactly what your visual system looks like all the time anyway.
So why would our brains be built this way?
Well, think about what the alternative is. What if we didn't have eye movements? Well, if we didn't have eye movements and we just wanted to see the entire world, we'd need to have our retina see everything in very high. Our would be 600 times bigger. And you gotta remember, the visual system's our best sense. This is our rich senses are impoverished.
Here's how your brain really sees the world. It's easy to think it's like this. And the whole world pours in. But really, it's like this. Your eyes sample tiny pieces of the world, and the brain fills in the rest.
Wide, full, detailed percept of what's going on moment to moment. That's probably pretty illusory, but a subset of the information that comes in through our eyes.
Don't believe it? Consider this. Your optic nerve is what connects your eye to your brain, and its location near the center of your retina effectively creates a blind spot near the center of your visual field. And yet, you don't experience the blind spot. Why? The brain samples the area near the blind spot and fills in the gap with its best guess.
It's probably not fair to say that we completely confabulate the world. It's just that we probably represent 1% of it at any particular moment in time. So it's a constant updating between what I see versus what I remember versus what I expect. And it's that dance between those three that actually gives us our sense of reality.
And amazingly, that edited reality, despite its limitations, serves us quite well.
You might ask, if I'm just keeping track of 1% of the information in the world, how can I drive a car? And it turns out that, first, 1% of the information that comes in from the world is actually an enormous amount of information. If we had to actually pay attention to everything on the world, time, it would take minutes, maybe even longer, before I decide to turn the wheel right or to turn the wheel left.
By understanding how my senses really work, I'm getting a peek behind the curtain. What my brain is
This very tiny amount of information, we construct this grand simulation of the visual world around us. It feels so real because we don't know better.
And most of the time, we all agree on that simulation. It's when we don't that we can learn something.
tweeted things like, "If that's not white and gold, my life has been a lie."
Swear on your mother's grave. That's not just illegal. Fine.
Massive arguments. I watched videos of people screaming at each other.
This is white, dude. White? That is dark blue. It's purple blue.
I bet there was a divorce here or there over this image.
So when you first saw that dress as a vision scientist, what did you think?
Well, when I first saw the dress, I thought it was blue and black, and I thought that the internet was yanking my chain.
Right, to get the goat of vision neuroscientists.
Sure. But in the morning, when I looked at my phone, I saw white and gold. And now, of course, I was obsessed. So I said, well, if this is an ambiguous image, all I have to do is disambiguate it. So I set to work, I got into Photoshop, cut out the dress, put it into a scene with lots of rich hues, and all of a sudden, boom, you can see the dress is white and gold.
Wow.
Now the pixels that make up the dress there are identical to the original image.
Now this doesn't work for everybody, but for most, the visual context can make all the difference.
What's different here is her skin is tinted blue, the background has blue light cast on it, she's standing in the shadow of that cube, and so your brain says, aha, I need to ignore some amount of blue light that is in this signal that's hitting my eye and render this as white and gold.
And if we flip things around,
Same dress, pasted it into this other scene. Her skin is tinted yellow, the background has a yellow cast, she's standing no longer in the shadow but in the light, boom, blue and black.
amazing. That's really amazing. So again, the pixels are exactly the same.
Identical.
The dress is a powerful example of how color really works in the brain.
Does that mean we're creating color in our minds, or does color actually exist in the world?
Color takes place in the brain. And I have prepared a little illusion for you that should convince you of this. So I have a picture of 4 cars here. I want you to tell me what color are these cars. Let's start in the top left.
Okay, so the one on the left looks red, then the one next to it looks blue. I'd say the one, the bottom there, bottom left looks green, and then the one next to it looks orange.
Okay. What if I told you that all of those pixels are not only gray, they are the same gray?
How is this possible? It's because the light that enters your eyes, contrary to what you might have learned in school, is not color. Color is an interpretation of your brain. Here's how it works. Light shines on the world and bounces off objects. This part you know. And light comes in different wavelengths, each corresponding to a different color. What you might not have heard in school is how those wavelengths change when they hit different surfaces, rough, smooth, wet, etc. This signal that gets into your eye is actually a product of the reflective properties of the object and the wavelength of light hitting it. Then that signal is focused on the retina, the back of the eye, where we have about 130 million light-sensitive cells. 3 types called cones are involved in color, each sensitive to different wavelengths of light, long, medium, and short. But that light still isn't color. For that to happen, our brain has to take that 3-piece code from the retina and use the relative response of the cones to encode color. It's not until that signal gets to an area called V4 that we get a neural representation of color that corresponds to our perceptual experience.
So why would our brains be built this way?
Well, if our brains weren't built this way, objects would appear to change in color all the time. And that would render color a pretty useless signal in the world.
That's because objects reflect different wavelengths into your eye depending on the lighting conditions. If your brain didn't compensate for this, a red berry would appear gray in a cave, blue at dawn, and orange at dusk. But instead, your brain carefully calibrates your experience to hold color constant. Similarly, color vision in other animals is tuned to their needs.
Different species have very different kinds of color vision that are suited to their particular channel.
And thus see the world like this. Birds need to recognize tiny color differences from great distances, so they have an extra phone that allows them to see more colors than we do. And bees need to find flowers rich in nectar.
information about the world. Absolutely. And the dress is probably the best example of that. It's a really powerful demonstration of how our color machinery works.
So why do people see this image of the dress differently? It comes down to your brain's assumptions about the lighting conditions. It seems that the more time you spend working indoors under artificial light, which is predominantly yellow, the more likely you are to say the dress is black and blue, because your brain assumes it is lit by artificial light and subtracts out the yellow. Conversely, if you spend more time in natural light, which is bluer, you're more likely to see it as white and gold.
So then, what is the actual color of the dress?
Well, Heather, I happen to have brought it with me. So what color is it?
It's obviously, I was right, blue and black.
Team blue and black for the win.
Yes. I can't believe this is the actual dress. I feel like I'm holding it's like a celebrity, the dress.
I know it should be in a museum, not my
Yes.
closet.
Before the dress, people hadn't really realised would differ so much between individuals. We're now quite used to the idea that we all differ on the outside. We all have differences in skin colour, in height, in shape. But just as we all differ on the outside, we all differ on the inside too. And this inner diversity is very important. It gives us a certain humility about our own ways of seeing.
Illusions give us a ringside seat to watch how the brain creates our world. And it's not just the visual domain. Try listening to this. Brainstorm, right? Simple enough. Now listen to this. Green needle. Okay, so you're thinking, what's the big deal? But what if I tell you that the two audio clips I just played were exactly identical? For most people, what you hear depends on which label you read. Sounds unbelievable? Here, try it again, but this time just read one. Okay, now read the other and listen again. Now, when I first encountered this, I was floored too, even though I know what's going on. When your brain encounters uncertainty, it fills in the gaps with its best guess. In this case, we have a degraded audio clip, and when you're primed with a certain word to go with it, your brain automatically jumps to the best fit. For most of us, we literally hear what we want to hear, and it gets even worse. Let's try one more. Another internet sensation that lit up debates across the country.
Once and for all, is it Yanni? Is it Laurel?
It's not Yanni, it's Laurel.
Did you hear Yanni? Who heard Laurel?
It is Laurel and not Yanni.
It's like that stupid dress again, all over but in audio form.
This is not saying Laurel, this is only saying Yanni.
Exactly, it's Laurel.
Now, about half of you hear Yanni and the other Laurel. And unlike the first illusion, I can't get most of you to experience this one any other way. You're locked into your version of reality. Experts aren't exactly sure why, but some of us seem to pay more attention to the low frequencies, Laurel, and others to the high, Yanni. The divide stems from the fact that the audio file is an ambiguous signal made up of both high and low frequencies. But by manipulating the frequencies, I might be able to change what you hear. High. Sensory input. Our perception of the
You just never lived there, okay? You lived in your mind, which is in the outside world.
Not convinced? Or maybe you're just asking. Does it line up with the red dot? You're like most people. Try again. The red dot and the green dot are actually perfectly aligned. That's because some neuroscientists would say that it's not your brain's job to perceive the world accurately. Rather, its job is to predict what happens next. To a certain extent, you see what you expect to see, a predicted path of motion. And this is what helps us hit a home run or flinch from a punch at just the right moment.
The brain is a predicting machine. Given a set of circumstances in this story at this moment, what are the likely, plausible next events in the story?
The brain is using sensory information to calibrate, update, fine-tune these predictions so they remain tied to reality in ways that are not constrained by accuracy, but that are constrained by how useful the brain's perceptual predictions are in the business of staying alive.
And to keep us alive, the brain has evolved to look for signals of potential danger. One of the most important is pain. And as neuroscientist Leanne Griffith is about to show me, sometimes that can be a kind of illusion as well.
So what is this?
This is a thermal grill.
Okay.
This is a machine that could give us some insight as to how pain works in your brain.
Alright, this is making me nervous already as I'm getting strapped in.
Don't worry. It's all an illusion, actually.
Okay.
And it's comprised of these different metal bars that are either set to a cold or warm temperature. So why don't you go ahead and touch that first bar? Warm, right? And then the next bar, cold. And then the next one, warm. You see, so they're alternating cold, warm, cold, warm. Now, you want to see what happens when you put your hand out?
Not necessarily.
Go ahead. Okay.
Okay, here we go.
Ow! Right? Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, what is going on there? It sort of feels cold at first, but then
it gets this kind of burning sensation, right?
Yes, very much so. It's super hot, like I'm getting burnt.
So it's not 100% clear exactly how this is happening, but what we think might be going on is that basically your brain is getting a little bit confused.
Okay.
It's feeling cold and it's also feeling warmth, and somehow it's interpreting these two signals as pain.
Here's what neuroscientists have separate sensors for heat, cold, and pain. Both cold and pain sensors are activated, but the cold ones override the signals from the pain sensors, telling your brain there's nothing to worry about. Unless, in this very unnatural scenario with the thermal grill, you happen to be touching something warm at the same time. Here, the heat signals cancel out the cold ones, leaving you with just the pain ones activated, telling your brain, ouch!
So in that respect, is pain real, or is it just an illusion or a construct of the brain?
That's a really good question. So noxious stimuli is a real thing, right? If you stick your hand in boiling water, that's an aversive stimulus. The perception of a noxious stimuli is real. Pain is more of a construct, right? And it can vary from individual to individual.
Pain is a construct of the brain. How do we know that?
But just because pain doesn't make it any less for survival.
Pain is a very important learning mechanism for children. They learn what behaviors they can engage in that are safe, and what behaviors, well, they should not engage in because they could cause them bodily harm. And different mutations, certain proteins that make them completely insensitive to pain. And so kids do things like bite on their lips or on their fingers when they're very young, and as they get older can engage in risky behavior. So pain is extremely important for us to feel.
Illusions are fascinating. They're like fractures in the matrix. They reveal to us that the way we perceive things isn't necessarily the way they are.
Illusions help us find the cracks in the mortar of that world we've built for ourselves and understand what it is our world is actually made out of and what the brain is actually doing. So most people think of the brain reconstructing the world more or less verbatim, but that's just not true. What it's actually doing is it's getting very little information and it's using that very little information to make a big grand model of the world.
We cannot process the vast amount of information that is constantly bombarding our senses. Illusions, you can think of them as shortcuts. Shortcuts make us faster, more efficient, with less resources. Based on these snippets of information, we build this more complex simulation of reality.
And that simulation of the world is what we call consciousness.
Consciousness. We take it for granted, but every time you wake up, your brain stitches together all your sensory inputs. The sound of a distant train, the smell of coffee, the warmth of the sun, into an experience of the world. And that experience, that awareness of the world, is what scientists call consciousness.
In neuroscience, consciousness is the holy grail.
Humans have been fascinated by consciousness for thousands of years, probably much longer than that.
Agree. Now, of course, the word consciousness means a lot of things to different people. To some, consciousness means being awake as opposed to asleep, or self-aware, or the contents of my thoughts. But that's not how we neuroscientists think about it. We think of it as something much more basic. It's just internal experience. It feels like something to see the color red, to taste a strawberry, to hear the crack of thunder.
We are complicated biological creatures, but the most central feature of our lives is that we are conscious creatures too. When I open my eyes, it's not just that my brain does some sophisticated processing of the visual information. I have an experience.
During the course of my journey, I've seen how our experience of reality is not what it seems. If my conscious awareness is built from my perceptions, flawed as they may be, how does that work and what does it mean?
So please take a seat.
Some of the first clues trickled in from people like this.
Put your chin on the chin rest.
A lot of very valuable information comes from patients who've had part of the brain damaged. By piecing these various parts, seeing what was lost, we've come to appreciate the role that these various brain regions play in the creation of consciousness.
We're going to calibrate your eyes first. And
A powerful example of this is the phenomenon of blind sight.
this is a patient who had a stroke in her visual areas in the back of the brain. And this stroke is affecting the visual field.
3 years ago, she built a pound. What happens when she doesn't move her eyes? Kelly wants to find experiments to pin down.
We're using iLink, which is the eye tracking system. Blind area, I don't see it. Left.
Strangely, even though she says she doesn't see anything in the blind spot, she gets it right more often than not.
Right.
So that some information is getting in,
Yeah, so-
but they're not consciously seeing it, but they can respond to it in different ways.
Exactly. Even if they say I didn't see it, but you tell me whether you saw it or not, that is the responsibility of child.
Keep your eyes closed. Okay. What's going on? To probe deeper, Lorella lets me give the patient a different version of the challenge. I put a miniature screwdriver in her blind spot. Okay, I'm gonna have you open your eyes and fixate.
Okay.
Okay.
See nothing.
You see nothing?
Nothing.
Okay. Even though she says she sees nothing, look at which tool she picks. Now turn over there and look at the objects. Tell me what you think you saw.
A screwdriver.
Yep. I'm gonna try another one. Next, I display a tiny wrench. Did you see anything?
No.
No? Okay. Look over there and guess what you think was there.
I think the wrench.
Yep.
I'm gonna guess the scissors.
Oh, great. Scissors. Time and again, she makes the right choice. Amazing. So, it seems to be that you're saying you're not seeing anything, yet when I'm asking you to choose, you're pretty much getting it correct. So something is getting in. How is this possible? It's as if she sees the tools, but doesn't know it.
They actually saw something, but they're not entirely aware of it.
Information is getting in, affecting our behavior and how we're responding to the world around us without there being a conscious perception of that piece of visual information.
Correct.
I'm gonna go with the hammer again.
Until patients like this, we scientists had never seen perception separate from conscious experience. And this tells us that perception and consciousness are separate things in the brain. But it also has me wondering, if someone can still use visual information without awareness of it, why do we have consciousness at all? What is consciousness for? A clue might come from babies.
Babies, everything we know suggests that they're born conscious. They're certainly taking in information from the time they're born. They are making rational choices about what they learn from extremely early on. And they are forming memories of their specific surroundings, of their parents, of their important relationships. We can see that in their behavior.
And all that behavior burns a lot of fuel.
Brains are expensive computing gadgets. So while you're just sitting here, your brain is using up about 20% of all the calories that you have. So it's using up quite a bit. Well, if you think about the 2-year-old, his brain is using 60% of his calories. So almost all that food is just going to keep his brain going.
To understand why young brains might need so much more fuel, check out the connections in a toddler's brain versus an adult's. A 2-year-old's brain has about 2 quadrillion synapses. By the time they hit adulthood, that number is cut in half.
So think about the difference between the baby brain, the child's brain, and the adult brain. The child's brain is more like backcountry roads, where you have little tiny roads that are going from one village to the next. None of them are very efficient. There's not a lot of traffic, and the traffic doesn't go very quickly. But they connect lots and lots of different places. And the adult brain is more like superhighways that get you from one place to another very quickly and take a lot of traffic, but don't connect as many different places.
As we age, in the interest of efficiency, we strengthen the connections that are useful to us and prune the rest.
You basically take neurons you don't need to get rid of them. And what you have now is a very lean machine that does certain things, and it does them very well.
You see this early brain that's very exploratory. It has lots and lots of potential, lots of possibilities. Not very good at putting on your jacket and getting out to preschool in the morning. And then we have this later brain that's very good at doing things, not so good at change, not so good at taking in new information, not so good at doing something new.
What this suggests is that maybe what consciousness is for is choosing what's important for us to be aware of at any given moment. Kind of like a spotlight.
For the adults, it's as if consciousness is this bright spotlight on one place and everything around it is dark.
While for children and babies, it would be more like a floodlight where nearly everything is illuminated.
You're conscious of a lot more that's going on.
Consciousness may be like an amplifier, boosting the important signals over the noise. Is there any evidence? This is where fMRI comes in, a special tool in neuroscience that takes pictures of the brain while it's doing something to map where blood flow is in high demand. The result is a map of brain activity. So, where is consciousness in the brain, and how does it work? To find out, neuroscientists designed a clever series of experiments that go like this. They start by flashing a word on a screen for about 30 milliseconds.
You flash this word, and the person is not able to see the word at all. She says, there was no word.
But in the fMRI scanner, the visual cortex is activated, even though people say they don't see anything.
So the trick here is to find the threshold, find the timing where sometimes people consciously see the image.
So if you make now the word a little bit longer, suddenly the person says, oh, well, there is a word, obviously, and it's completely visible. There is really a sort of all or none phenomenon. Either you see it or you don't.
And once you've done that, you've got a really powerful window onto the neural correlates of conscious perception.
When that happens, suddenly a suite of different parts of the brain shows a surge in activity. The parietal cortex, which integrates the senses, the anterior cingulate, which modulates drive and decision-making, and the prefrontal cortex, which handles reasoning and higher-order cognition.
An ignition of distributed brain areas that come online together, speak to each other, and broadcast this information to the rest of the brain. And this is what we think is occurring during conscious perception.
According to some experts, this communication between brain regions is the signature of consciousness. This discovery could have real-world applications in matters of life and death, but that would take one more step, figuring out how to measure consciousness.
Okay, stop there for today. So, when light comes into your eye, where is it actually deciphered? In the prefrontal cortex, in the middle of the brain, or in the back of the brain? The parietal lobes or occipital lobes? Okay, and with that, I think we could presume it makes sense that that's where your cerebellum has certainly developed that gives you coordination, because again, your cerebellum gives you input from what you see out in nature that makes you be able to walk straight, to be able to shoot a free throw, to serve a volleyball, to pass it, to set it, to spike it or kill it, or whichever, however you want to look at it. But anyway, we'll pick up with this tomorrow. I'm going to go grab your papers, and I think we'll set a due date for those. Right now we're looking at Thursday, but we will cross that bridge when we get there. Catch up to you next time.